The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so full. Ships from over 800 worlds had docked at the massive orbital station that floated above a quiet, unnamed star. Every seat in the grand amphitheater was taken. Delegates from species that rarely left their home systems had made the journey. Some had traveled for months just to be there. That was how important this day was. That was how much the galaxy wanted to see it happen. At the center of the circular chamber, a single podium stood under bright lights. Around it, in rising tiers that curved like a bowl, sat hundreds of delegates. Their colors, shapes, and sizes were wildly different. Some breathed filtered air through tubes. Some had 6 limbs. Some had none. But they all shared one thing on this day. They were all there to watch humanity fall. High Counselor Drethval of the Sathani called the session to order. His voice was deep and calm, and it came through translation devices as a smooth, neutral sound. He was old, even by Sathani standards, and he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. He had gathered the witnesses. He had read every report. He had listened to every complaint, and there were many. The charges against humanity were read aloud by a junior clerk, and the reading took nearly 20 minutes. Humans had terraformed 17 planets without permission from the Council. They had made contact with 6 pre-spaceflight civilizations, which was strictly forbidden under galactic law. They had refused to reduce their military fleet size after the Second Outer Rim Agreement. They had ignored 3 direct warnings about their expansion speed. They had built a warp relay network that cut through protected space claimed by the Vorkai hegemony. And most irritating of all, they had done all of this while smiling and offering trade deals. One by one, delegates rose to speak. The Vorkai ambassador, a tall creature with pale gray skin and 4 narrow eyes, spoke first. She described how human engineers had shown up at the edge of Vorkai space without asking, begun drilling relay posts into asteroid belts, and then invited Vorkai merchants to use the new network at a reduced rate. She called it manipulation disguised as generosity. The chamber murmured in agreement. Next came the Thelian speaker, a small being who communicated mostly through color shifts in his outer membrane, which the translation system rendered as words. He spoke of how a human science vessel had landed on Thelia Minor, a world the Thelians considered sacred. The humans had not known it was sacred. They had planted a garden. They had left behind seeds and a polite note wishing the locals good health. The Thelians had been furious for 6 years. Then came the Orith Collective, speaking through a shared voice. They described how human soldiers had fought off a Rekthun raiding party in disputed space, without council authorization, and had done so with tactics so unexpected that military analysts still could not fully explain what had happened. The humans had been outnumbered 4-1 and had lost no one. The Orith called it recklessness. Others in the chamber quietly called it something else, though they did not say it aloud. The testimonies continued for hours. Through all of it, the 3 human delegates sat in the lower observation area reserved for the party under review. They were allowed to be present, but not to speak until called upon. They sat in plain gray suits, the kind worn for formal occasions. No medals, no decorations. One of them, a woman with dark eyes and short hair, had a small notebook on her knee. She wrote in it sometimes. The other 2 sat very still. Her name was Dr. Yara Osei. She was the chief ambassador of the Unified Earth government, and she had been doing this job for 11 years. She had sat in rooms like this before, though never quite so large, and never with quite so much riding on the outcome. She had known for a long time. When the testimonies ended, High Counselor Drethval called for the formal vote. It was close, in the way that a sealed door is close to keeping water out. 812 delegates voted in favor of the motion. 31 voted against. 19 abstained, mostly the smaller species who had dealings with humanity and were too nervous to commit either way. The motion passed. Drethval read the verdict in full. Earth and all human-controlled or human-affiliated territories were hereby removed from the galactic community. All trade agreements were suspended. All communication channels were to be formally closed within 60 days. Any species found doing business with humanity after that period would face review and possible sanction. The exclusion was to be permanent unless the Council voted otherwise, and there was no provision in the Charter for such a reversal vote to be called. The hall was very quiet when he finished. Everyone waited. The three humans sat still for a moment. Then Dr. Osei closed her notebook, capped her pen, and stood up. She smoothed the front of her jacket. The movement was unhurried. She looked at the High Counselor. She looked around the chamber, at the hundreds of alien faces watching her. Then she smiled. It was not a bitter smile, or an angry one. It was not the smile of someone trying to be polite in a terrible situation. It was the small, quiet smile of someone who has just received news they already expected, and who has already made their plans. She spoke into her translation device. Her voice was calm. Understood. We thank the Council for its time. That was all. The two other delegates rose beside her. Together the three of them turned and walked toward the exit at the back of the chamber. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floor. No one tried to stop them. The only sound was the soft rhythm of 3 pairs of shoes on stone, growing quieter with each step. The doors closed behind them. In the chamber, no one said anything for a long moment. High Counselor Drethval looked at the closed doors. He had expected something different. He was not entirely sure what, but something different. Shouting, perhaps. A protest. A plea for more time. Or a promise to comply. Or at least some sign that the humans understood what had just happened to them. The Vorkai ambassador leaned over to her aide and spoke quietly. The aide looked uncertain. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a delegate from a small aquatic world tilted their head and watched the closed doors and thought about the smile. They thought about it for a long time, and the more they thought about it, the less comfortable they felt. Outside the chamber, in the long corridor that led to the docking ring, Dr. Osei and her 2 colleagues walked at a steady pace. One of the others, a tall man named Commissar Adeyemi, glanced at her. That went as expected, he said. She nodded. Did you add anything to the notebook? He asked. Just a note about timing, she said. We are ahead of schedule. Behind them, the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy sat in its grand hall and watched the doors and began, very slowly, to wonder if they had just made a mistake. The banishment was announced to the galaxy in a clean, official broadcast. Every world in the galactic community received the same message in their own language. Earth and all human territories had been removed from the community. Trade was forbidden. Communication was closed. Any ship flying a human registration flag was to be turned away from all member ports. The Council called it a necessary action taken for the stability of galactic order. For the first few weeks, the mood among Council member worlds was something close to relief. The humans had always been unsettling, not because they were cruel exactly, or even especially aggressive, but because they were relentless. They moved too fast, built too much, and seemed completely unbothered by dangers that would stop any other species cold. Other civilizations had looked at certain star systems and said, the radiation is too high, the gas concentrations are wrong, nothing can live there. The humans had looked at the same systems and said, interesting, and then shown up 6 years later, with habitation domes and mining rigs. It was exhausting to watch. So when the broadcasts went out, and the official silence from Earth began, there was a general feeling of having exhaled, after holding one's breath, for too long. But silence is only peaceful when you're used to the noise. The first sign of trouble came from the Vorkai hegemony, about 4 months after the banishment. A quiet report filtered up through the medical bureau. The mortality rate from the pale fever had increased by 31% in the outer Vorkai provinces. The pale fever was a well-known illness among the Vorkai, treatable but not curable, managed through a cycle of nanite therapy developed 20 years ago. The nanite cycle required regular software updates to remain effective. Those updates, it turned out, had been produced by a small human biotech firm based in the Callisto Industrial Zone. The updates had stopped coming. The Vorkai Medical Bureau sent a formal request through official channels. There were no official channels anymore. They sent it through old back channels. No response. They tried to reverse engineer the update protocol. Their engineers looked at the code and found it was written in a framework developed entirely by humans, building on top of systems that assumed the continued existence of a human maintenance team. The Vorkai were not sure where to begin. The mortality rate kept climbing. In the Sathani merchant guilds, a different problem emerged. 34% of their long-range logistics software had been built on human-coded foundations. This was not widely known because the surface interfaces were Sathani, and no one had looked deeply at the underlying layers in many years. When the software began to degrade, without receiving updates from its original developers, ships began making navigation errors. Small ones at first. A delivery scheduled for one station arrived at a neighboring one. A fuel depot received the wrong type of catalyst. A diplomatic courier arrived 3 days late to an important signing. Then a cargo hauler misjudged a jump and came out of faster-than-light travel too close to a moon. The crew survived. The ship did not. The Sathani technical teams began auditing their systems and found humans everywhere. Not in an obvious way. Not in the way of conquerors or invaders. In the way of builders who had been too useful for too long. Human programmers had been hired as contractors. Human engineers had consulted on projects. Human architects had proposed frameworks that worked so well that no one had replaced them. Now those frameworks had no one to maintain them. The Orith Collective faced a subtler problem. 3 years ago they had quietly hired a team of human xenobiologists to assist in negotiations with a difficult neighboring species, the Greth Khan, who communicated through a combination of seismic vibration and chemical release that most translator systems struggled with. The humans had cracked it in 4 months. The negotiations had concluded successfully, and the Orith had signed a productive mining agreement. The human team had gone home. The Greth Khan had a dispute about the boundaries in that agreement, and the Orith had no one who could speak to them properly. Their own xenobiologists estimated it would take 8 to 12 years to develop the necessary expertise. The Greth Khan were already making noise along the border. Quietly, without announcement, a junior analyst in the Council's own Information Bureau compiled a report. She had been assigned to track the early effects of the banishment on member worlds. She had expected to write a simple summary of smooth transitions and minor adjustments. Instead, she filled 37 pages. She listed sector by sector, world by world, the things that had quietly stopped working. Medical systems, logistics networks, translation archives, agricultural drought management programs that ran on human-designed climate modeling software. A peace agreement in the Death Sora cluster that had been mediated by human diplomats and was now fragmenting without anyone who understood its delicate internal logic. Small things, mostly. No single crisis was catastrophic on its own. But they were everywhere. She wrote her conclusion carefully, because she was a junior analyst, and she was aware that her superiors did not like uncomfortable findings. She wrote, "The economic and infrastructural integration of human services within the galactic community appears to have been significantly underestimated at the time of the banishment decision. Restoration of full operational capacity may require considerable time and resources." Then she wrote a second version of the same sentence, the one she actually believed. "We did not banish humanity from the galaxy. We banished ourselves from humanity." She submitted the first version. She kept the second version in a personal file. Meanwhile, far beyond the Council's borders, humanity was not suffering. The 60-day window for the communication blackout had barely closed before the first new colony ships were crossing into uncharted space. They were not running. They were not fleeing. They were doing what humans had always done when given open ground and told it was theirs to keep. They moved. The colony ships carried families and engineers and farmers and teachers and doctors. They carried seeds for 100 types of food crop. They carried data libraries with the full record of human knowledge, copied 12 times over on different physical media. Because humans had learned long ago never to trust a single backup. They carried the names of every planet they intended to find, even though those planets did not have names yet. In the Council's Grand Hall, High Counselor Drethval received the junior analyst's report, read the sanitized version, and set it aside. He had expected complications. All transitions had complications. The member worlds would adapt. They were resilient species, all of them. They had existed for centuries before humanity had crawled out of its atmosphere. He poured himself a drink and looked out the viewport at the stars. He did not know yet what the stars on the other side of the Council's maps looked like. He did not know what was being built out there, in the dark between galaxies, where no Council survey drone had ever gone. He did not know about the 41 new worlds, not yet. The Council drone was a small thing, barely larger than a clenched fist, and it had been traveling for 3 years. It had been sent in secret, which meant it carried no official markings and no registered flight path. If asked, the Council would deny it existed. It had been sent by a small group of senior analysts who had grown nervous. They wanted to see what the humans were doing out in the dark. They suspected it would be very little. The drone returned its data package 18 months after it had reached the outer edges of explored space. The analysts opened the data expecting to find a handful of struggling outposts, maybe some early construction, possibly some signs of internal conflict. Humans had a long history of fighting among